Hello and welcome to the Supernatural track here at Continual. Tonight we're continuing the Patterns and Dances discussion about the recurring behavior, and this time we're going beyond the Winchesters themselves to their friends and frenemies. So before we dive into that conversation, let's let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves, starting with Lynn.
Hi, I'm Dr. Lynn Zubernis. I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor at Winchester University, and my area of research is fan psychology. So I have written lots of books on that, most of them focusing on the show that I am a big fan of, which is Supernatural. The last two books were written with the actors and the fans of the show. So that's Family Don't End with Blood, and then the one that focuses on the legacy of the show, There'll Be Peace When You Are Done.
Awesome. Travis.
Hi, I'm Travis Adams. I am a Marine Corps veteran and a social worker that works with veterans with readjustment issues, and I use pop culture. I've contributed to a book series by Travis Langley to include the supernatural psychology, Daredevil psychology, and Westworld psychology.
Okay, and I'm Gail C. Martin and Morgan Bryce. As Gail, I write epic fantasy, urban fantasy, near future, post-apocalyptic books. And as Morgan, I write urban fantasy, male-male paranormal romance, but all the modern worlds are ones that Sam and Dean could walk into and feel right at home. I was thrilled to contribute a chapter to There'll Be Peace When You Are Done. And I'm a regular staff writer for the Winchester Family Business blog. So, Patterns and Dances, let's talk about some of these friends and frenemies. And let's just dive into the particularly scrumptious snarl that is Rowena. The Winchesters have a history there. They kind of do a two-step with her in terms of, are we on the same side? Or are we on opposite sides? But a lot of recurring things happen. What's your read on their dance with Rowena? Lynn?
I love Rowena, and Rowena is one of my favorite characters in the whole series. So I guess I have a lot of thoughts. Rowena is one of those characters that is my favorite kind of villain, which is the kind of villain that, even though you know logically that she has done horrible, horrible things. I mean, from the very first time we meet her, she, there are dead people in her wake everywhere she goes, and she's seen, she's portrayed as pretty narcissistic, really, cares about herself, will do what she needs to take care of Rowena. And yet, partly because of the way Ruth Connell plays her, and partly because they do start to peel back the layers with her, and you get a sense of her backstory. And the more you get a sense of her backstory, the more you are pulled into seeing her as a more nuanced character, not just a one-dimensional sort of villain. And every time that happens, I love that push-pull that happens with the audience. I think it happens with the Winchesters as well, but it also happens with the audience, because periodically I would try to remind myself, why is Rowena one of your favorite characters? I mean, think of the things that she's done. She's done some really horrible things. And yet, every time she's on the screen, I'm like, oh, Rowena's in this one. Yay, let's see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree completely. Travis?
Yeah, I mean, even when I see her name pop up on the credits, right, like it's going to be an interesting episode. And very similar to what Lynn said, she does start off there's three sides of what's going on, right? There's the boys' side, there's whoever, if it's Lucifer, whoever, and then there's Rowena, and she's playing her own game. But you do get to learn a lot about her. I love when we get to learn, like when she's talking to Crowley, like, I had to hate you or else I'd love you. And how she couldn't love anything else. And then to see the sacrifices she gives for herself, I think that that we see the character change so much, but keep a lot of those things, because she wants to be powerful. She wants to be big. She wants to be known for doing stuff. And she's all about that. And even with the Book of the Dead, and having that, kind of going over that, and just knowing that she has that accessibility to power, And that's what draws her, and that's what keeps her going. And you can't really get her down, right? She always has a backup plan because she doesn't trust anybody, because she can't be trusted herself most of the time.
And it's interesting because like so many villains, like that's their villain story. I want power. I want to be the all powerful one. That's like the typical villain story. And even in real life, like that's a typical villainous story, people who just want power. And yet with Rowena, she never gives up that wanting power. And in the end, ultimately, she does have power. She is I mean, it's hell, but she's the ruler of hell. But there's something about knowing her backstory and how powerless she was, and how much her backstory is sort of coded as the kind of disempowering that women have happened to them all the time. There's always a part of me that is still rooting for Rowena to have that power. Like I found it impossible to ever truly root against her. And every time you see her go through one of those moral, ethical quandaries of, I want to just run out of here with the book. I want to leave, who cares if they're stuck in the AU or wherever they are? I just want to think about myself. Oh, damn it. I'm not really able to completely do that. I love that. And it's not that often that you get a long-term villain that can really have a backstory that's detailed enough that you can really feel those feelings. I love that Supernatural did that with Rowena's character. They didn't do it with that many characters, but they really did do justice to hers, I think.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Lynn, about kind of being coded as the disempowered female, because I think that plays a huge role in Rowena's dance, in that because her opportunities just for staying alive were so limited in her time. And she had to fight so hard just for any kind of autonomy. And she had limited choices. She didn't come from a wealthy or powerful family. She had no one defending her. And so she did the best she could with what she had at her fingertips, which was power, her magic. So there's really a very strong survival instinct underlying all of it. It's hard to hate somebody for surviving, whatever tools they have at hand. I don't think she really gets the opportunity to think about other people until she's spent some time with the Winchesters and established a little more of a base. She's not constantly in terrible peril. And now she has a little leeway to do more than just survive. So I find that interesting, as well as the all the trauma she's been through and all of the healthy or unhealthy, mostly unhealthy coping mechanisms she's developed over the centuries to deal with it, not the least of which was getting killed several times by Lucifer. And how she and Sam bond over some of those things. So I think that all of those complicate the tempo of the dance, or the type of dance that she and the Winchesters have, because she dances differently with Dean than she does with Sam. They definitely have a different interaction. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on that?
I don't know, but it makes Sam Weena a really powerful and popular ship, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's because Sam has so much like respect for other people. And because he's always the one, but like not all monsters are evil monsters, right? Not all these witches are evil witches or vamps or whatever. He comes at things with a more balanced perspective oftentimes. When we see that with Amy also, right? Like he doesn't want to hurt her, and then Dean comes through and takes care of it. He's the big brother that doesn't want anything to live, and that's their job. It's a family business.
Yeah, Sam is not a black and white thinker from the very beginning. And he also, no matter how much trauma he himself goes through, he never loses his empathy. I was thinking when I was listening to Gail talk before that there's such a real life parallel that it's difficult for people who have been very traumatized themselves and are still living in trauma and unsafe conditions to feel a lot for other people, because just surviving takes precedence over those other feelings. But Sam, no matter how much trauma he went through, he never lost that empathy. You see it in the different way that Sam and Dean respond to Jack as well later on in the series, that Sam is from the beginning willing to think, come on, like maybe this is nurture's going to win out over nature here. Maybe we need to give him a chance. And Dean being more protective, more black and white, thinking of no, this is not going to turn out well. And I think that happened with Rowena too. I love that scene that you mentioned about when both Sam and Rowena kind of bond over their mutual experiences of trauma with Lucifer. It was such a subtle scene. It was so nicely written. It wasn't dramatic. It was a very quiet scene, but it was really powerful. And it did show that, Sam specifically says, I know I could talk to Dean, but this is one time when the difference between Sam and Dean kind of gets in the way for Sam, because he doesn't feel like Dean will understand or get it, even though he's been through his own trauma. It wasn't with Lucifer. It wasn't in quite the same way. So Rowena is the only one that really gets it.
Yeah. And I think that Sam also is driven to find that redemption arc for other people, knowing that everyone expected him to go dark, and he could have easily. And so while Dean made a single exception to kill everything for Sam, everything except you, because you're my brother, I think Sam seems to feel through the whole series, I've got to extend that mercy to other people if I want it for myself. And I think that's part of his dance with Rowena, is that I think he sees how things could have gone differently for him, boy king of hell and all.
Yeah, and you get to see like how close she thought of Sam when he's the only one that can get into her room, like her office, and to go get the supplies. Like it's coded for him, because she knows that he'll do the right thing with all the stuff that she has.
Yeah. They also have in common, that Dean jokes at one point afterwards calling Sam a witch, but Sam is also much more open to magic and witchcraft and those kind of things than Dean. So he and Rowena kind of had that in common too. I think that like her death scene before she, gets stabbed and walks into the I think that's so powerful, because it's one of those scenes where I want you to be the one to take me out. Like, I respect you. We have an understanding. I know this is hard for you, but I want you to be the one to do it, because you get me. You understand me. I sobbed my way through that scene.
Well, and I think it's interesting because while Dean sees, jokes with Sam about him being a witch, there are a number of times when Dean works spells all by himself.
Sure.
And so you have to look at it and go, if Sam has power, what are the odds that that power runs in the family and that Dean has a touch of it too? So, maybe don't throw so many stones at the glass houses.
Yeah, because you see in the French Mistake, right? He's the one that remembers it. He's like, I saw everything that they did, so I'll just copy that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are other times that we see him out without Sam where he summons somebody or works the spell while Sam's off doing something else. So, this whole definition of what does it take to make you a witch is a bit of a controversy as well, and eye of the beholder. So yeah, it definitely complicates that dance, because in a way, there's rarely a two-person dance in Supernatural. There's usually a three-person dance, both brothers and whoever else it is. And the brothers so often have their own relationships with the other person that are very different. Speaking of which, let's talk about Crowley.
When I got introduced to the show, I had a client that he was already a big fan. He actually had a 67 Impala that he was building for his sister, who was a big fan, and we watched the show together.
Wow.
That's the only thing he had. He lived in a storage unit and just worked on his car. And I told him that I was starting to watch a show and like about the books and stuff. And he told me, he's like, I can't wait for you to meet Crowley. He is my favorite character. I said that on a panel with Ruth, and she sent him a message kind of calling him out on that. But because he has so much depth to him, and you learn so much as going from like a crossroad demon all the way to be the king of hell, and hear him. And, you know, he always has an angle. He always has something going on. Like when he tells Bobby to sell his soul and he takes the picture, right? Like stuff like that. He always has an angle, and he's always going, and you kind of feel bad for him because you see how Ruth, or, you know, Rowena, how he grew up with her and what that was like, and how he was impacted by that, and the relationship that they have, and how toxic it is, and it builds and then falls apart and builds, and how he still wants to have power, and he wants to be the smartest one. He needs to be the smartest one. So when Lucifer takes over, he's like, I'm 3 steps ahead of you, and kind of goes back and forth.
Yeah. I mean, it's similar to Rowena's situation, really. Again, you know, we find out the backstory little by little of Crowley, of Fergus. Mark Shepard would correct me and say, that's not Crowley's backstory, that's Fergus's backstory. But they were intertwined, you know, so Fergus's backstory did have an impact on Crowley, as much as sometimes Mark wants to say, no, that didn't have such a big effect on Crowley, that was Fergus. But again, you know, once you understand that and you kind of see him as still this abandoned little boy who's desperate for love, then it's hard to completely hate him, even though, again, you know, all the things that objectively he has done. He's done terrible things, maybe even more than Rowena, really. He's betrayed the Winchesters. He's just lucky that they haven't died as a result of things that he's done. And yet you do empathize with him. And I think, just as my feelings about Rowena are influenced by how I feel about Ruth Connell, I think my feelings about Crowley are inevitably impacted by Mark Shepard, who is very difficult not to love. You know, Crowley is a lovable villain for sure, and an amusing one, because Mark is so funny and was able to breathe so much life into that character. So yeah, and the two of them are very similar, which I guess makes it even more fascinating that they were intertwined also. What a complex relationship. And you're right, very different between Dean and Sam. You know, there's that whole time when Dean is a demon and allied with Crowley, at least for a while, for their summer of love. I mean, that meant something to Crowley. I don't think it meant a whole lot to Demon Dean, but it seemed to mean a whole lot to Crowley. There is a part of him that's always looking for that belonging and that acceptance.
Yeah, and then you see how he even treats his son, and he keeps that cycle going. I work with a lot of my clients, and I try to get them to see, like, hey, even stuff that happened to you as a kid is going to impact you later on if you don't look at it, if you don't take care of it, if you don't challenge it. And I think that Crowley and Fergus, and really Mark, plays that really well throughout his tenure on the show. You get to see these characters grow and kind of come into their own, but you see it at a pace that doesn't feel rushed. Right?
Mm-hmm.
You can see things, instead of it being a 60-minute episode or 48 with commercials, you're looking at it as like this progression of the whole show. You get to see little changes here and there. Like when he's drinking blood and he becomes a little more humane and compassionate, and then starts judging himself, but gets hooked on it.
Yeah.
You get to see all these little intricate things that they pull off so well.
One of the gifts of getting a 15-season show, you so rarely get to understand the villains of a show the way we got to understand some of these villains or frenemies or whatever you want to call them. I mean, that's so rare. Rowena and Crowley were on over multiple seasons. That's what a gift that is. That's wonderful.
Well, and I think it's interesting because Crowley not only has his dance with Sam and Dean, but also very much with Rowena. And so anybody who had a less than good childhood, I think, can really, or felt abandonment from a parent, can really identify with the way, even though he knows it's going to come back to bite him on the butt again, he still gets suckered into hoping time and time again that this time it'll be different. And it's more than either of them, I think, are capable of giving at this point. Rowena is what she is, and she's got what she's got. And even though I think sometimes the hope is still there on her side too, it never works. And so both of them then end up burned again until the next time when the dance starts all over again. And it really doesn't end until they're gone. They really, nobody ever is able to completely cut it off and walk away from it. And I think that, oddly enough, for a show like this and for characters like that, I think that's heartbreakingly realistic.
Yeah, it was almost too real. It was truly tragic the way you could see that they did care about each other and their own children, and yet they could not ever find a way to allow themselves to be vulnerable enough to admit that and to connect. The last scene that Rowena and Crowley have together when they're both alive sitting on that bench, I hated it because it was so hard to watch. Like she can't meet him halfway, he can't meet her half, like they can't do it. They cannot do it. And God, that is tragic. I mean, Travis, I'm sure you've thought this too, but I think of clients, real people who you want so much for them to be able to connect with the people in their lives who they desperately want to connect with, and you can't make it happen as a therapist either, like in real life. So I think that was hard for me to watch because I was thinking about real people for whom that same kind of a tragic ending has happened.
Actually, one of my clients has been struggling with the relationship she has with her parents and with her brother. And I got her watching the show to kind of help see that, family doesn't end in blood and that we get to pick different family. And she watched all 15 seasons in about 3 months. She just burned through it. And she saw it, but she became so hooked on the show. And we've talked about it and used these characters to help kind of explain where she's at and how she feels.
Yeah. And the show doesn't shy away. Like I know that, there are people who didn't like the ending of the show because it was a difficult ending. But one of the things I value so much about the show is that for a show about the supernatural, which is the least realistic thing you could come up with, it is an extremely real show. And it doesn't wrap everything up and tie it up in a bow and give it a happy ending or say, and then everybody got along. Like it's a tragedy. It's a horror show at its roots. And as much as it's hard to watch sometimes when those things happen, I value that about it.
Yeah.
I think that they did a really good job. I was talking to all my friends over this weekend and just about like the losses that we experienced throughout the whole show, right? The people who die and how Bobby's death is probably one of the most impactful for most fans. But yeah, I mean, when Crowley said, so long boys, and Rowena, and just seeing that and Charlie's death and all those people, you're so tied to these people. And like you said, Lynn, like having 15 seasons to develop these characters, where Cass was supposed to be a one-off, and then he finished the series for he's in 11 seasons he did. So yeah. It's because the fans care and because they're so well written and they have such depth to the characters that you're not just thrown at and spewed on, you to learn. And that's what I loved about the show.
Yeah. Well, now one of the other powerful dances occurs between Chuck, Michael, and Lucifer. So that's been a dance since the beginning of time, practically. And that's not counting Amara in there. But now you've got 4 family members who are all vying for love, acceptance, recognition, being heard. And it goes on and on and on through millennia. And it doesn't really resolve until they'll kill each other. So thoughts on that little dance and pattern?
I think that you can see the pattern, same with like Dean, Sam, and John, on how the sons react to John and how Michael and Lucifer react to Chuck. Like Michael is very obedient, very whatever he says, like he has Chuck said this, or in his case, God said this, and that's how it is. Where Lucifer is like, no, like, I don't want this shit. And it turns out that, you know, Chuck loved Lucifer so much that it hurt him so much. And you see that kind of with Sam too. It's like John loved him, but didn't know how to connect to him. And then you see Sam's regret of their relationship as it ends. But seeing like the dynamic between Michael and Lucifer and how they fight, but they won't let anybody else fight against them. You know, if this is a brothers thing, we're in it together until we're not, and then it's just me and you. And then seeing the resentment that Lucifer had on God or Chuck, and yeah, I think it's so interesting how everything kind of played out, and it was so similar to like the first season, second season with the boys.
Yeah. Lynn?
Very convoluted relationship to me. Like, I feel like over the course of the whole show, or not the whole show, but the majority of the show, there were so many changes to like who Chuck was, and first he was a prophet, and then maybe he was God, and then no, he really is God, and we had different incarnations of Michael, and then we had AU Michael, and we had the original Lucifer, but then we had the Halucifer, which wasn't really Lucifer, but just Sam's projection of Lucifer, but then it was Lucifer again. I honestly, that's not one of the dances that really hangs together for me all that well. I mean, I agree with what you said, but I feel like there were so many changes to those characters and their interplay over the course of the show that wasn't one of the most powerful ones for me. Even when Jensen got a chance to play Michael, which I know he was really excited about, I really wasn't. I think he did a great job, but I didn't find Michael a compelling villain because I didn't know that much about him. I didn't feel like I really understood him. I could see the parallels there, what they were going for, but that wasn't as powerful to me as, you know, their relationship with like Crowley and Rowena.
Okay.
Look, I actually can criticize the show. I know this is shocking to people because I don't criticize it very much, but I feel like all that changing around of those characters over the course of a decade left me not as attached to them as I might have been had they had a more coherent arc.
And that's not even counting Vince Vincente.
Yes, that's right. We haven't even talked about Rick Springfield.
All right, Travis, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I agree with Lynn, especially on the Jensen's portrayal. The first episode, I really kind of liked how he was playing him, but then as that season went on, I feel like we didn't get a lot of depth. We didn't get to know him. We didn't get a lot of screen time with him. They took him out pretty quick. But like, and I've mentioned this on previous panels, we talked about one of my favorite scenes is when Sam and Dean are running the therapy between Lucifer and Chuck. In the bunker. I just love that scene so much as a therapist, but as a fan also, you know. So
let's use our I statements.
Exactly. It's a GIF I send often to people.
No, it was funny, but I also I think I really need continuity and consistency. And Sam playing any kind of therapist with Lucifer involved, I don't know. I had a hard time with that. Like, this is the person who horribly, horribly traumatized Sam. And I feel like Jared did a really good job of trying not to let us lose sight of that. Like, he injected the continuity in there. I can't see that Sam and Dean would have done, maybe Dean would have done that. I can't see that Sam would have done that. So I agree. It is an amusing scene, especially for a therapist. But there was the other part of me was just like, really? Really? I don't really.
So one of the other evolving relationships over the time is with a friend, and that's Jody. What kind of push-pull dance do they have separately and together with Jody Mills?
You know, I think of her because it's almost like a mother figure when she kind of comes on, absolutely, and then it kind of like transitions to like a cool aunt. Like they're real cool together. They have dinner together. They talk to each other when they need each other, and she's dependable. She trusts the boys, you know, and trusts was earned very quickly for her with them, and even with Bobby, seeing the relationship she shifted with Bobby in those 2 episodes, I think, because she was struggling and had rough times and was able to trust those guys. I think that you also get to see that mother figure come out as she starts taking in those wayward girls, and supporting them and helping them, because she knows how rough it can be. She sees the boys and how much they struggle. So she wanted to be a strong parental figure.
I just rewatched the episode with the chicken dinner at Jody's house where they have the talk. And Sam and Dean are both just kind of stuck there, not knowing what to do. And it's just played so beautifully. Lynn, what do you think?
I actually think that, again, Supernatural does a really nice job in looking at how complicated it is for people who, like Sam and Dean, who lost their mother and father, who had a very complicated relationship with their father, conflicted relationship with their father for sure, lost their mother at a really young age. So, Sam doesn't even remember her. Dean barely remembers her. And so there are other people in their lives who come along and play that role of father figure or mother figure. And they kind of pull for that even when they're grown men, because there's a part of them that has that hole, that gap that never got filled in. But it's really different. It's interesting, I think, what happens because it's Supernatural. Periodically, as the show goes on, their dead parents return, either for, 1 episode or for several seasons or whatever. And that complicates the relationships that they have with those other people who have filled in those roles. And I think, I don't see a lot written about that. I don't even know that I've thought a lot about it, but that's very real too. Because oftentimes when people have problematic relationships with parents, the parents are not completely gone. The parents are sort of dipping in and out, and that complicates the attachment to other people who could be parental figures. And then when they dip back in, there's that loyalty to the original parents that then interferes with those other maybe healthier relationships. So I really like that. Again, it's very subtle. There's never like a whole episode devoted to it, but you can see little nudges around that from time to time. There's conflict, we know, between Bobby and John, even when John was still alive, about whether it's okay to play ball with the boys or they should be, training all the time. And there's a little conflict between, not conflict, but there's a little awkwardness maybe between Jody and Mary when Mary comes back, because Jody was that sort of mother figure. So I really like that they do that. They did a good job with that.
Yeah, that whole conversation, that awkward conversation in the Asa Fox episode between Jody and Mary. And there's a huge amount of subtext there with everything that Jody is saying and not saying, and that Mary's receiving and not receiving. And there's definitely some chiding on Jody's part and some defensiveness on Mary's part. And yet that all happens without it mostly being said. And it's a brilliant scene and so real.
Yeah, that's a great episode. Underrated episode.
Before we finish up, we got to talk about Bobby. I mean, talk about push-pull dances together and separately. The boys both had their very different relationships with Bobby. And what do you think?
I think one of the most interesting things about the boys' relationship with Bobby is that he did seem to kind of show some favoritism sometimes to Dean. And that's something that you don't really see that often either. Every parent knows, oop, nope, not supposed to play favorites. That's not a good thing. It can be very hurtful to kids, but there are sometimes, and partly it's because of things that happened to Sam and Bobby. There were times when Sam tried to kill Bobby because he was not in his right mind or he was possessed or something. These things happen on Supernatural. And that happened less between Bobby and Dean. But I think also, Dean and Bobby were probably more alike, just like, they were both very focused on hunting. Sam wanted to do something else. I feel like Sam and Bobby could have bonded more. When you look at Bobby's house, there were books everywhere. And I wonder if there were times, when Sam was young and they were staying with Uncle Bobby, if they did bond over things like books, but we don't really see very much of that. I think that was one of the interesting things about the dance that the three of them had. They all loved each other. Clearly, Sam loved Bobby, Bobby loved Sam, but I do feel like there was a closer relationship between Bobby and Dean.
I mean, even Bobby's last memory is them watching TV and watching a movie together, and hearing them bicker about, you know, what's good movie candy and what's not.
Yeah.
So that's like his happiest memory to go out on, and I think that says a lot about the relationships that they had. And I agree with you. I think that he did have a tighter bond with Dean. I mean, yeah, he has books inside of his house, but outside of his house is surrounded by cars, you know, and that's Dean. And like the masculinity, not so much that it's toxic. So I don't think Bobby comes off as toxic in the slightest, but he talks about, like, I'm not your prom date, you know, like, man up, suck it up. But then he also shows compassion when he's like, Sam's been running into burning buildings since he was 13 years old. Like, he's a man. So he does walk that line pretty tightly. And yeah, is it Uncle Bobby or is it the father figure? And I think he does a really, really good job at like at playing a very close or like even adoptive dad to the boys, and you see that. And I mean, even in that death store episode, he's like, I raised two boys that are great. They've saved the world, you know. So it is that father figure, exactly, you know. And I think that's why that episode with him dying is so impactful. Is you see so much emotion in it from him and towards the boys, and you get to meet him. You get depth in Bobby. You get him for 6 seasons almost, or 5, because he's not really in first season, but you know,
he's in every season. Bobby appears in every single season.
It's like I think he's in one of the last episodes on season 1, right?
I think so.
Yeah, so you kind of get him a little bit really quick, but yeah, just the way that he interacts with the boys, and as it goes through closer to that episode, he's in so many more, and he becomes like a full character, and they develop him more. And he's always looking out for them, and he'll always protect them. You know, he's a very much a protective person, especially after what happened to his wife and how their argument was about kids because he was so scared of having kids.
Yeah, we get that backstory with him too, that traumatic backstory, that episode where you see the flashbacks of his abusive father and what happened, you know. So again, yeah, even though you would think that we wouldn't feel like we know these characters that were not, you know, the main characters, over time we really did get to know a lot about them. And I think, you know, it was very hard to see Bobby die. I think we were all feeling very attached to him by then. He was a little bit of a surrogate dad to everybody in the fandom.
Well, and I think, you know, yes, when Bobby's possessed at one point, he does tell Dean, you were always my favorite. But I've always wondered about that because, you know, like you said, as a parent, you do your very best not to have favorites. But sometimes there's an easier child. And depending on what else is going on, sometimes you just love that child for being easy when the rest of the world is hard. And that role can change over time and maturity and what's going on. But sometimes just not having one thing on fire or fraught with anxiety is a blessing. It's like a cool drink on a hot day. And I think Dean was the easy child. Dean followed orders. Dean did what he was told. Dean liked cars. Bobby's interaction with Dean was easy and not fraught. Bobby had something key in common with Sam. Yes, Sam tried to kill Bobby, his father figure, but Bobby did kill his dad. So I think the complication sometime that came up with Bobby and Sam is that they were too much alike. That Sam was the not easy child because he was too much like Bobby, and that's where they butted heads. That's where Sam never took the easy answer. Sam never would just go away and shut up if you told him to. He was always the why. Right. And I think Sam was the not easy child. And that doesn't mean you don't love them. It just means they wear you out, or that they bring up stuff inside you don't want to deal with, but it happens with them, and that makes it less easy. And so I wonder about that when I see the relationship there, when Bobby so clearly loves both of them, did it really come down to being the easy and the hard child?
Maybe with John too. I mean,
Mhm.
we've heard, Sam and John butted heads also. Sam's one of those, yeah, I mean, I've got a kid like that. She's never easy, but she's amazing, freaking amazing.
And then you've also got the whole birth order thing, going in there too, which
Yeah.
factors in as well. So
Yeah.
that definitely colors the dances and the expectations and the patterns that go along with it, because so much of those really does come down to, what do you expect the other person to do versus what do they do versus what's good for everybody. And that's kind of at the heart of the whole thing.
Mhm.
Any last thoughts? Because once again, we have blown through our time here.
I'm feeling bad because I was a little bit critical. So now I have to say that I really do think that overall the show really did such a better job than so many shows do at always making these characters nuanced and always letting us know, not in malicious ways of dropping it on our head, but little subtle things that we get to follow through storylines and story arcs. It showed us these villains as so much more, and these friends as so much more, even though again they weren't the main characters. I appreciate it so much when I watch other shows, especially that are like quote unquote ensemble shows, and I sometimes think it's been 2 seasons, 3 seasons, whatever, I still don't really know this person, so I don't know how to care about them because I don't know enough. And Supernatural really did a good job of showing you and telling you enough that you really cared and invested in these characters.
Yeah, with a lot of other shows, I feel like the secondary characters are some of those big cardboard standees that are on a conveyor belt going along the background. Oh yes, there's him. I recognize him, but he's cardboard.
Yeah.
Travis, last thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with what Lynn was saying. And the creators and the directors and producers were so responsive to what the fans were kind of hooked on to make those changes and to bring that stuff up. And having like the passion of the actors themselves loving the characters and really becoming those characters for so long. It was a beautiful thing to watch over time.
Awesome. Well, folks, we've run out of time, so let's let everybody say where people can find you online. Lynn?
You can find me on all social media at FangasmSPN. I have a website, fangasmthebook.com, and you can find the books that were written by the actors and the fans at peacewhenyouaredone.com.
Great. Travis?
You can find me on different panels like this, as well as the Marine_Peer on Twitter.
And I'm pretty easy to find at gailzmartin.com, morganbryce.com. Social media is a variation of all of those. I run the Supernatural TFWNC group here on Facebook. I'm on the Winchester Family Business blog. And of course, I'm here on the Supernatural track and more on Continual. Well, thank you so much to our wonderful, wonderful panelists for being with us tonight. And thanks to all of you for watching and listening. There'll be more Supernatural coming up soon here on Continual. So we'll see you online.